Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So fabulous to be learning with you online, and Shabbat Shalom to my dear colleagues. Of course, we are pre-recording this on Wednesday, October the 4th at 10 o'clock, and it's going to be shown this coming Shabbat on October the 7th. And so I wanted to frame our content today before we do the blessing. This coming weekend, Sunday, October the 8th, is Simchat Torah. And on Simchat Torah, we encounter the end of the Torah, the last chapter of the Torah, Deuteronomy 34. We don't actually, V'zot HaBracha doesn't get its own weekly parsha. You only read V'zot HaBracha, and you only read Deuteronomy 34 on Simchat Torah, this last chapter. And of course, the last chapter of the Torah narrates the death of Moses on the wrong side of the River Jordan, with a heavy dollop of poignancy, because Moses is called upon to climb the top of Mount Nebo. He's called upon to see the River Jordan. He'll never cross it. He's asked by God to take a look at all that land, the promised land. You spent 40 years. You spent your whole life's work to get into that promised land. You're going to die on the wrong side of the River Jordan. Moses, you're never going to enter the promised land. Just see that land you cannot enter right before you die. And then he dies. And what I want to do is talk about kind of two meta questions. One is, what does this last chapter, the death of Moses on the wrong side of the River Jordan, what does it mean to the whole meaning of the Torah as a whole? I mean, you know, the end chapters, last chapters, whether it's in a movie or in a book, are essential to the meaning of the work as a whole. How does the death of Moses on the wrong side of the River Jordan plug into the meaning of the Torah as a whole? And the second meta question is, geez Louise, it doesn't feel like it's Simcha. It feels kind of sad, but we read it only on Simchat Torah when we're celebrating the joy of Torah. And how do we put all that together? So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, v'harevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha Beit Yisrael, v'nihye anachnu v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzei amcha Beit Yisrael, Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma, Baruch atah Adonai hamelech Torah la'amo Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah. Okay, so our two meta questions are, what's the meaning of this last chapter of Torah to the meaning of the book as a whole, and how does it fit into Simchat Torah, which we're going to be observing tomorrow on Sunday the 8th. But what I want to offer up is a read of the death of Moses as a play in three acts. There's Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. So let's just get to the content right away and figure out how all this fits together. So, Elisa, would you read for us the first paragraph of Deuteronomy 34, verses 1 through verse 4. This is Moses looking at the land he'll never enter.
Moses went up from the steppes of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the summit of Pisgah opposite Jericho, and the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, the whole land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev and the plain, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will assign it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross there."
So I just want to pause on this, because it turns out that there are no fewer than 4 instances in the Torah, when you add up the instances in Numbers and also Deuteronomy, when 4 different times God says to Moses, climb to the top of the mountain and see the river you can't cross, and see the land you can't enter. You're going to die on the wrong side of the River Jordan. And that would be painful enough once, painful enough twice. It would be painful enough 3 times. It, in fact, happens 4 different times. And my question is, it's a leitmotif. It's a recurring motif, times 4x. What is the meaning of it even once, and then why is it so important that it has to be repeated multiple times?
Yes, so I think it has to do with God, the relationship between Moses and God, that the relationship is so strong that God can really converse with him and tell him what's going to happen. The other thing I think that it shows is that that we need to be told things that we don't really want to believe many times. And I think the last part of it is the idea of this is really about Moses's ability to continue as a leader, as the leader of the Jewish people, the one that communicates only he and God together. No one else speaks with God. And yet Moses knows that he is not going to be able to reach his own, what he believes should be his destiny, and yet he continues to be a leader that is as forthcoming and as strong and as important a symbol for the Jewish people, that without him the people would not be able to continue. So
what I hear you saying is that there's something in here about unfinished work. And it's not a little unfinished work. It's not like a small incidental piece of unfinished work. But his core mission was, he was drafted. He was happy, in Midian with the sheep and with his kids and with Zipporah. He was drafted, confront the Pharaoh, lead him out of Egypt, lead him through the desert and into the promised land. And Moses dies with this fundamental core piece of his work unfinished. Michelle or Elisa, what do we make of that? That it's fundamental core stuff that is unfinished.
I find it so powerful in its reach across history, because when we look at, for example, Martin Luther King Jr., he so powerfully summons this moment in thinking about his own life and his own impact, and that he may not get to that mountain, but he knows where the people are going, and he has a vision of what is possible that transcends himself. And so this story becomes not just a story about Moses, it becomes a potential story about all of us in every era, in every age, if we can just imagine something that can be built that is better than what we have today. We may not see it ourselves, but we can plant the seeds.
When you were talking about Dr. King, I was also thinking in my mind about Theodore Herzl. I mean, Herzl dies at 44,
yes,
and he can envision the Jewish state, but he never lives in the Jewish state. And he's buried in Har Herzl, but all this stuff happened long after he died. Elisa, what are the resonances of this? I mean, there's Herzl, and there's Gandhi, and there's Moses, and there's Dr. King, all great leaders. What are the resonances of this for ordinary human beings who are not Herzl or Dr. King? But what does it mean to us as we're leading our own lives that there is a promised land we can't see? And how has this intersected with your pastoral work with real families?
I think it's interesting. I'm especially grateful for the examples that you brought of contemporary leaders, because to my knowledge, they were not bitter or grieved about not making it to that promised land, because they were invested in a larger goal and a larger purpose. And Moses takes it very personally that he can't go, and it's not about the people. He takes it very much as about him, and I think that's the nuance for us, that when we're invested in our families, when we're invested in our communities, when we're invested in something larger than ourselves, then not making it to the promised land feels really different if it means that our child or our friend or our neighbor or our community or our country can make it to the promised land.
Right.
But if it's all about me, then that's very awful. Like, if it's just my life and I just can't make it and it's all about me, then there's no consolation. And then you do need to hear it multiple times, because like there's no explanation, there's no redeeming value to my loss. Unless my loss is for, like, I served a higher purpose and it's going to help somebody else.
In other words, the read that you're offering, Elisa, if I understand you correctly, is that when Moses sees the land that he cannot enter, yes, of course, there's personal sadness, that I worked hard, my work is, in a sense, incomplete, an unfinished work. This is unfinished work. I wanted to get there, I was meant to get there, I didn't get there. Sadness, unfinished work. But the children of Israel will get there. And I can see a future where the descendants, the children of Israel, are going to be living there. So I want to offer up that I find this, if you were writing a masterpiece like the Torah, and you're writing the climax to the Torah, you want something that applies to 100% of humans, right? You don't want something that's a specialty. You want something that is completely relatable and, in fact, universal. And I will tell you that I find this vignette universal, 100%. I mean, how many weddings have you been to where the grandmother can't attend, or where the grandfather cannot attend? Either because they've passed on, that's very common, and we lift up their names, or frequently they're just not physically able to travel. They can't make it to the chuppah. They know that their granddaughter is getting married. They know their grandson is getting married, but they're limited. They're in a wheelchair. The notion of flying from point A to point B is beyond them. And so that wedding of that grandchild is the promised land. And they can see it, but they can't enter. And there is just something tremendously affirming that it's not just happen. It doesn't happen to me only. It happened to Moses, the greatest leader ever. It happened to him. I guess it must be the frail lot of common humanity. And I think that, I read that in this.
Yeah, I also think there's a progression. You mentioned the times before that Moses is told about this, and you do see some of that anger, and certainly our Midrash brings a tremendous amount of arguing from Moses, if only, and negotiating. But here in the end, what's so fascinating to me is as we leave the verse that you left off with, Elisa, and enter into, so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there. The text itself does not any longer reflect a sense of dis-ease or even a sense of blame. In previous chapters, it's because you hit the rock, it's because of something Moses did. In this place, it's just go look, go see. And then Moses died. And to me, that brings me a lot of comfort as well, because it holds out something else that is important for 100% of us. Just can we reconcile ourselves to the idea that is our fate, that we will see our promised land? If we dream big enough, there will be something that will be beyond us.
Right.
And yet we can let go.
Right. So will you pick up with that? So the first act is Moses climbs to the top of the mountain and sees the promised land he can't enter. Let's read the second act. Michelle, will you pick up with, so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there?
So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the command of the Lord. He buried him in the valley of the land of Moab near Beth Peor, and no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. And the Israelites bewailed Moses at the steeps of Moab for 30 days. The period of wailing and mourning for Moses came to an end. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands upon him, and the Israelites heeded him, doing as the Lord commanded Moses.
So what does that add to the party, this second act?
To me, that speaks of Moses kind of finally in his life getting there. Moses had laid his hands on Joshua, right? He says, tag, you're it. We've got you. Like, take over from here. I believe in you, and you have a new chapter that you're going to write. I think that's something beautiful that all of us need to find in our lives. And you've pointed out beautifully in the past about the idea that his eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. That is one thing that not 100% of us get.
Right.
He had still strength left in him, and So I think there's something really important about that strength that is still in him, not only physical, but perhaps spiritual strength that remained in him in that moment. And then the last piece for me that has always been so beautiful, if you were writing a holy book, in so many religions, the most important thing is, where is your hero buried? You know, who are we go and we visit those sites, we pray at those
Right.
sites. And
Herzl is at
Herzl's at Herzl, right? All the
Right.
the various graves that we have that become holy sites, even in the midst of war, like going to Uman, right?
Right.
That will make that pilgrimage. And Moses' burial site is unknown. It's not about Moses. It's about us. It's about the people. It's about that vision of that promised land.
In
I think
Jim
that-
Collins' sense, ultimate level 5 leader, which is total personal humility and total fire for the cause. I don't want anybody making it simus about me. It's not about me. Dan.
Yeah, I think this also paints a much broader picture of the gyre of life and history. It's not linear. It's actually points in a spiral of time, and I think part of the bigger picture, which we'll probably get to in a minute, is the idea of how this relates to Simchat Torah. And I think that Simchat Torah was, as we know, is a created holiday. It's not in the Torah. It was created by the rabbis in Babylonia, and so what we do is we end the Torah. And then so Moses ends, but he doesn't, because we start with creation all over again. We turn around, we hafoch, and we go right back to the beginning, so that there's no real end to it. And I think so part of that yearning is the fact that even though it seems like there's an end, in a sense there really isn't, because we just continue to go on,
Right.
and move forward, but in a spiraling cycle.
I love that. And Dan, you're bringing out something that I also noticed in our high holiday readings this year with Abraham, that here in the text it says, Ad hayom hazeh, the Torah breaks the fourth wall. There are very few times in which the Torah tells you, I'm not just telling the story that I'm telling in this moment, but I'm telling a story that continues on until this very day. When is that very day?
Right. Aliza, could you say a word about this whole idea of tag your it, the role of Joshua and Moses laying his hands upon him? Because it feels like the consolation for I can't enter the land is that I know the people I love will enter the land, and the consolation for I can't lead them through it is that a person that I love will lead them through it. And could you just talk about this whole idea of, Ruach Chachma, Ki Samach Moshe Yadav Alav, the spirit of wisdom, and he's placed his hand. How do you see that, what Michelle calls tag your it, how do you see that theme percolating in the lives, again, of real families?
Well, I think one interesting piece is that Moses' children, his biological children, are absent in this picture. And I think that's it's something that I experience a lot. I talk to a lot of families who want their children to do or be X, Y, or Z, and would really like some rabbinic support to make that happen. And there's an interesting reality, which is that sometimes your kids choose what you want them to choose, and sometimes they don't. And here's a case where Moses, we don't know where his children are, but he has.
They're not there.
They're not there.
Yeah.
They might be unnamed and sort of in the wings, but
Right.
he doesn't get that. He doesn't get to transmit it in his own nuclear family, or at least we don't see him transmitting that. We see there's a weird dynamic that happens, but what he does get to do is he gets to find someone who gets it and who loves his project and who wants to work on his project. And that's really lifted up. And it's not just that he's investing this person with his own values, but the spirit of wisdom, this larger giant project. And the verbiage of ordination, right? He placed his hands, becomes the way that all clergy people are ordained from then on, that there's this idea that that you can, it doesn't have to be. So I think that in that way, you're asking what's the real application? That is that if you're living a life of meaning, don't think of it in a limited way of how you transmit that. May not be the people that you think are going to take it on will take it on. And it's really important to have an expansive view that your whole mission is about transmission. Your whole mission is about empowering the next generation, empowering wider circles, and don't think small about that. Think really big.
So I want to just double click on the following subject, which is kind of near and dear to my heart, after the year that my family's had, which is it possible to be okay with your own mortality? Is it possible that you're, on the mountaintop of Mount Nebo, so to speak, looking at the land, and you're not going to enter it, but you know that you've got Joshua and the children of Israel are going to enter it. And is it okay for you, is it possible, is it even possible to say, I know I'm going, I know my time is up, I know I'm gone, I know I'm leaving this world, and I'm deeply at peace? Is that possible, or is that a contradiction in terms? And I guess my question, I would love the three of your voices on this. Do you think, what's the pshat, the Torah in its simple contextual meaning? Do you think Moses is at peace as he dies, or not at peace?
Well, I want to answer the first part of your question. I think at this point in my life, I cannot imagine being okay, not continuing to live. I can't imagine that.
You can't imagine being okay with your own mortality.
Yes, I cannot imagine. Now,
and what would need to, can you imagine something that would change so that you were okay with your own mortality?
Maybe, but I think that, maybe, God willing, I live many more years.
Right.
And maybe there will be a point where I'll say, okay, I'm now good with what I've done with my life. But at this moment, in such a way that Moshe, he was still, his strength was unabated. As long as I can have some strength to be able to be part of this world and to be helpful and to be meaningful to this world, I want to continue. And that's how I feel now, and that may or may not change. But I think the real answer to that is that none of us maybe really know that until the moment. Mm.
Yeah, I don't know that there's just one answer to your question. I think it's yes and, because I do see Moses at this moment getting it. He does get it.
When you say getting it, meaning what?
Getting, like, he understands. I'm going to see the land. I'm not going to get to go in. My time here is done. There's nothing I can do about that. And I have a successor, and I'm watching what will come to pass. And he dies in the middle of his story, as we all do. I mean, had that not been the moment that he would die, there would be another moment. And because his strength is unabated and he still has vigor, he could have done more. And I think we all carry both of those instincts in us.
Right. Can I invite you to think, Michelle, about a counter narrative, just on your point? Imagine that you are, one of the writers or the editors of the Torah, and you're coming up with an end. And this Deuteronomy 34 is one end, but somebody on the writing team posits a different end, which is, hey, what about this? What about Moses leads the people into Israel? They get to Jerusalem. They go to the Imbal Hotel. They have a really nice meal at the Imbal, a nice Shabbos dinner. There's an a cappella band singing some songs. And then at the end, Moses makes one final speech. We're landed. Here's the Imbal. Here's Jerusalem. Enjoy Shabbos. And then he passes. What about that as a counter-narrative end?
I think there are other religious traditions that have those types of stories. I think we have those types of stories within our tradition at other points in time. Abraham going off with Keturah and his, new
kids.
batch of children, right?
Right?
That's one of those kinds of stories. We have those. That's not Moses's story, and I think it's important that it's not Moses's story.
But it is, and that's, I think, the interesting thing, because Moses' story is getting the people out of Egypt. He gets that moment. He gets them to the desert. He gets them to eating delicious manna, which they might have argued about. But he gets that moment.
And he gets them at Sinai.
He gets all these moments, and the interesting thing is, I think he is both the most humble man on the earth and the most self-centered and greedy person that we know, because he has all these giant moments, and it's never enough.
Do you think he's at peace? Do you read him at peace in
No.
Deuteronomy 34?
For sure not.
For sure not. Why the for sure not?
Because I think, you could say that God's reiteration is for God's sake. I tend to think God doesn't speak for God's sake. I think God speaks for Moses' sake. And that 4-time repetition of just like, this is what it is, this is what it is. Like it feels like God is responding to Moses. God is responding to where Moses is at. And Moses has had, he's had more great moments than anyone in the history. Like he just has. And I think it's really hard to adjust to when your life has been about these climactic moments, to adjust to not getting the next climax.
Well, that's why I say we all carry both, right? Because there's always going to be the next great grandchild's birth. And then there's going to be the bar bat mitzvah, and then the graduations and all the things. Forget it. There's the next soccer game. There's always something that we're going to want to live for.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think that Moses is not at peace, and I agree about that, partially because he has such a broken relationship with his family.
Yeah.
And how can you be at peace when you
Dan,
don't have
let's interrogate that for a second, because, and this connects, Elisa, with the point you made that Gershom and Eliezer, his sons, are not mentioned here. Right. Can you go into Moses' interior life for a minute, Dan? In that, Moses has a brother Aaron. Right. Then they walk hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, together through the years. They confront Pharaoh together through the years. They're together through the years. They have their spats like around the golden calf, but for the most part, they're very close brothers. And Aaron has the nachas that he has four sons who go into the family business, and not of an Avi who died, but Eleazar and Itamar continued the family business, and they're the Kohen Gadol, etc. And Moses has these 2 kids who are doing something else. I don't know what they're doing, but they're not in the family business. How do you think Moses processes that asymmetry? My brother's kids are priests. My kids are, they're doing stand-up comedy. They're doing improv. They're doing something altogether different.
I think that's a really hard question. I think that there will always be bitterness about that. And I think that what he does is he sublimates that brokenness in his family by throwing everything that he has into being the leader of the Jewish people. And it might also be vice versa, maybe because the way that he feels, but the fact that he's the leader of the people, that he has this connection, that he's the only one who speaks with God, that perhaps that is why he has this brokenness with his family. And it's a cautionary tale about we can talk in this room about workaholics, how we make sure that we do that life-work balance. And I think that part of that is a cautionary tale that the Torah gives us. We have so many examples in the Torah about families that, the whole Genesis story is about families that are dysfunctional and broken, and yet we continue as a people trying to find that sense of leadership. So again, I'm not really sure where that goes, but
you think Moses takes that brokenness with him to his last breath, which adds more to the texture of his last breath.
I love the Aaron model. I love the idea your kids grow up and they're in the family business. And certainly from a tradition point of view, that is everything that we hope for and want everything that I hope for and want. I'll only speak for myself. But I wonder about that vision of Moses being broken, that his children didn't go into the family business, and he's seeing Aaron's children over there, and they went, look at that nachas, because I'm not so sure that Moses is happy in his business. And I wonder whether Moses, like the banker who would love for his son not to be a banker, but be a poet or a guitar player or run a nursery school or, follow his joy. And I wonder whether in Moses' own mind, is he satisfied that his sons are actually not following, and that it's not expected of them that they should be Moses. And by the way, we haven't gotten there yet, but we will get to, there's no one else like Moses that arises. And in some sense, by Moses' children not following him in, we say, you don't have to be like Moses. Right. You can be yourselves.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's affirmed also by the moment where he chooses not to circumcise his son, and Zipporah actually comes along the road. Like, there's that weird moment of like, why, Moses, are you not following the Torah that you're preaching? Why are you not adhering? And it might be that he has some ambivalence about leading his children down that path. It ends up saving his life and certainly theirs. But there's that very weird scene on the road where Zipporah is like, what are you doing, Moses? You live in this Torah. You got to do this Torah. I'm going to teach you how to do this Torah. I'm going to save your life by bringing you back to Torah.
So this image of Moses is that as he is about to die, both nationally and in terms of the Jewish people that he's been leading, there's ambivalence. You know, on the one hand, I'd love to be in the promised land, but I know that they're going to be there and they'll do just fine. On the one hand, I'd love to lead them, but I know Joshua's going to do just fine. And so there's ambivalence there, and also at the personal level. You know, that there's relationships that are broken that maybe didn't get fixed. And he dies in the middle of his story, as we all do. And then comes, and the story could have ended there, right? The story could have ended, you know, Moses died, they mourned him for 30 days, Joshua led them in. And that would have been a fine end. You know, Joshua continues, tag you're it. But there's a coda to the coda to the coda. And I want us to unpack what this adds to the story. Dan, if you'll read the last 3 verses of the Torah.
Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out face to face for the various signs and portents that the Lord sent him to display in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his courtiers and his whole country, and for all the great might and awesome power that Moses displayed before all Israel.
Right. So one thing that's so striking is that Moses is so humble. He's the most humble man on the planet. But the end of the Torah is Hamorah Hagadol Asher Asa Moshe Le'enei Kol Yisrael. That this humble person who doesn't really like plaques, you know, I'm anonymous, right? At the end of it is it's that he displayed all of this this great power. And what does this coda add to the story? What does this coda add as we're thinking about death and life and saying goodbye and legacy? What does this add, this last piece?
I love it because it feels like a confirmation, affirmation that you never know your impact, and you shouldn't know. Like, there's something about that should always be a mystery, and you should live and invest and do all the right things, and trust that you're not going to get that biofeed. Like, no one's going to send you a letter and be like, here is your impact, and this is your impact report, and this is how many people you've touched, and this is how many. Like, no, you don't get that. Nobody gets that.
It's infinite.
Only, yeah.
And unknowable. Mm-hmm. What else do you make of it?
I also think if Moses is telling Moses' story, there's a lot of failure and frustration in that story. And there, the people of Israel are not exactly embracing him for his wonders and miracles. They're fetching about the water and why did you have to bring us here? And when do we get there? And all those things. And I wonder, in a sense, about the consolation that is pulled into this beautiful ending, that actually all the pain of his leading and of his leadership and all the places he felt he failed, what he is going to be remembered for is not those things. It's not all the times he fell short. It's the one thing that he did so long ago. I mean, that's ancient history from where he is at 120 years old. Right. And yet that's his core story. And so I want a little bit of a gloss on what you said, Aliza, just a slight tweak, which is that I think it's not just that we don't know what we're going to be known for. Sometimes we do, but we worry that it will get overshadowed or overtaken by the places we feel we've failed. And Moses here is getting the consolation of being able to be seen as the one who did those wonders before all of Israel. Like, they got it. They get it in the end. We get it in the end.
So there's something very, if I read you right, Michelle and Elisa, there's something very generous here, that Moses is not getting judged on his worst day. Yeah. He's getting judged on his best day, which is how we'd want to be judged. We've all had our worst moments. Nobody wants to be judged on the basis of their worst moments, the time that we really blew it, the time we really stepped in it. We want to be judged by the nobility of our intentions and by our best moments. And here, the Torah is ending, we're human and we all mess up. But Moses, we want to judge you on the basis of your best moment and on the arc and the trajectory of your life. And great. Dan, anything you want to add about this coda, the last 3 verses of the Torah?
Actually, not
No.
really.
Okay.
Not really.
So I'll add this, and then which will bring us to our final question, which is what I find about this that is the coda that is so powerful is that Moses. It's powerful and universal. It's powerful and it's 100% of us. Moses is dead, but his stories are not dead. The stories about him are very much alive. And what this is telling us is that even though Moses died and was laid to rest somewhere, we don't know where, the stories, we're going to keep talking about it. And in fact, we keep talking about it, and we keep rehashing it. And I think that's very much the case with Papa who dies, and Mama who dies, and our mother who dies, and our father who dies, and our loved ones who die. And we're here in the Gann Chapel every night. The last 3 verses of the Torah are embodied and instantiated, because every night somebody comes and says, I am honoring the 34th yortzeit of my beloved father, and I still remember this story about my father. I mean, that literally happens every night here. At 7:38, somebody tells a story about what happened to their father 38 years ago, and inevitably, even though it was 34 years ago, 38 years ago, 42 years ago, it's fresh and fragrant and resonant as if it just happened. And I think that's what this is saying, that people die, but stories live. People die, but stories live, values live, legacy lives. Mm-hmm. Which brings me to our last, and I just want to do a quick go-around, which is how does this Deuteronomy 34, the death of Moses, with the commissioning of Joshua and the stories about him living on forever, how does that plug into the basic project of the Torah, the meaning of the Torah, and how does it plug into the project of Simchat Torah? Last questions.
To me, it feels really significant that we all sort of adjust what are we using, what are we doing, what's the project of celebrating Torah, and that is to help us to focus on how we can have an impact, to help us to connect to people, and to help us to be okay with whatever results from that project.
Look, my favorite teaching from this last part of the Torah is we end with Yisrael, we end with the people of Israel, and that Lamed, then we begin again in Bereshit, and it connects to the Bet, and we've got Lev, we've got heart. And this story that we bring about from creation all the way to the people of Israel, to our belonging, to our sense of nation and purpose and promise and possibility, takes place in and always has to live in our hearts, our Lev. So it's a story we got to keep telling again and again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love your framing of that. It's really our stories that really make the difference, even though they might have happened years ago. So I think for the entire Torah, when I ask bar mitzvah kids, what is the Torah? They always say it's the stories about the Jewish people. And that's what they remember. They don't remember, they don't really know or remember that it's a mitzvot, that it's that there's so much else going on. They remember the stories, and those stories are what carry them through to the next generation. What carries each of us through from one generation to the next is the retelling of our stories.
Well, I will just end with just sharing the following, which I don't think I've ever told you guys, but Deuteronomy 34 was the first text that I ever fell in love with. And I fell in love with it at a particularly vulnerable time. I was 20 years old. I was a junior in college. My dad had died December 14th, 1981. And I was back in January to exams and trying to figure out how to do life without my father. And I remember being in Leverett Hall, Leverett G30, and I would take out the Chumash, and I would read Deuteronomy 34, and because it felt to me so unfair that my dad died at 64, he died so young, he died without ever really seeing me as an adult. Like I got to the brink of adulthood, but I didn't cross over. He didn't see adulthood, and and he worked so hard. He never got to retire. He died at 64. He never got to retire. He never got to see. He never got to do. He never got to enjoy. It felt fundamentally unfair, and I didn't know what to do with that emotion. And then I would read Deuteronomy 34 every night, and I thought to myself, well, he's in good company. He's in Moses' company. If this could happen to Moses, it could happen to all of us. And the fact is, it did happen to Moses, and it does happen to all of us. And so for me, the meaning of it is you only get to really make sense of your life if you live with an awareness that we don't live forever, and that the clock is always ticking, and there's a certain urgency that flows from our mortality. But the good news is you can maximize your time here. You can have a huge impact. You can find the Joshua. You can find your son of noon. You can fill people with values that are of meaning to you, and then you know that you're part of a story that way preceded you and will continue long after you're gone. And that is a hopeful and beautiful note, so powerful you could end the Torah on that note. So Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach, and we'll look forward to being with you in Shul this Shabbat and tomorrow as the cycle of Torah and Jewish values continues from generation to generation, beginning this weekend. Shabbat Shalom.
Amen.
Shalom. Amen.
Shabbat shalom.